It was a warm day in April, and the church was fuller than it had been on many previous Sundays. Most of the people that had come the day before and waited in line for an hour, some of them even 2, had come back. And smiles and hugs were given around, and old friends and neighbors that time had completely changed their faces had been reintroduced. And through the back of the church, through the giant wooden doors, came a new face. It was older and weathered with time, but nobody there had ever seen it before. Nobody to this day knows how anybody found out who he was, or how they found out he had gone to school with Otis. But he was brought up to the front of the church, and when he was introduced to Etta, the light that came into her eyes was something no one had seen for days. He passed over to her this very small pile of old black and white photos, filled of images that no one had ever seen. It was Otis from school, all 6 feet 5 inches of him towering over every single person that he was in a picture with. One of Etta's grandchildren, or children, turned to him and said, "Do you read lips?" "No." He shook his head. He began to sign back, and everyone there held up their hands and said, "No." I stood behind my grandmother that day and thought, damn it, Otis! Here it is, our last chance. Here's this man from who only knows where he came from or how he even found out that your funeral was today, and this was our chance to find out. He's full of stories. We all knew it. But it was the last nail and the final assurance that there were years of my grandfather's life that we would never know. I was always told as a child that it was pride that had kept my grandfather from teaching anybody how to sign. But it was an excuse that never really rang very true to me. Our parents taught us some sign. We learned our letters, our A, B, C's, our colors, our animals, but we were always told, don't ever sign to Grandpa. Apparently I did it once. My mother made me. I had gone up to her and I had asked her for an apple. I had learned the sign, and she had told me, go ask your grandfather. So I toddled over, and I stood before him, and I said, apple, please? My mother said the shock that came over his face could have knocked him out of his chair. We saw him sign sometimes, only finger spelling, with my grandmother, the only person allowed to break the don't sign to Grandpa rule. But we expect that was not a choice on his part. And the only time she would ever use it is if one of us used a word he had never heard before. Or he had met a new person, and she would spell their name to ensure that he had gotten it right. We could communicate with him just fine. My grandfather was a champion lip reader. There was nobody that I can think of that could read lips better than my grandfather. He read them so well that we all assumed that lip reading was just another class you took at deaf school. You went to social studies first period, English second, lip reading third. That apparently is not how it goes. Who knew? The pride thing never made sense. My grandfather's deafness kept him from nothing. He graduated from the Rome School for the Deaf around 17 or 18, I assume. I don't know. Came back to Hudson Falls, New York, married a hearing woman, had 6 hearing children that he co-parented to the best of his ability, had a job at a mill in Fort Edward, who even came up with a special way to communicate with him. Tap you on the right shoulder, attention. Tap you on the left, danger. The story of the man that tapped my grandfather on the wrong shoulder that one time was told forever. I think it was the image of 6 foot 5 inches of my grandfather tearing out of the mill at full speed that was the kicker, but no one asked my opinion. My grandfather was a great man, My mother said as a father, he wasn't very hands-on. Of course, it was the mid-60s and 70s, and he worked all day, though my grandmother also worked full-time. She said there was no real closeness with my grandfather. Obviously, there was no conversation. But as a grandfather, he was amazing. He had 10 grandchildren in his lifetime. And during that lifetime and those 10 grandchildren, he missed nothing. He came to everything anyone ever did. He sat through soccer, wrestling, football, baseball, dance, gymnastics, indoor volleyball, school pageants, high school musicals, baptisms, church pageants, graduations from preschool to 12th grade. He missed nothing. So pride? Pride didn't make a lot of sense. I thought back to it later of all the reasons he could have not signed. Maybe he signed out in public as a teenager in Rome, and somebody assumed that he was mentally handicapped, which in the 50s wouldn't have been a far stretch for somebody to think. And so he thought, that's it, I'm not signing. Pride, I couldn't believe. Stubborn, that's a different story. Perhaps he came home from the Rome School of the Deaf and realized that neither of his parents or his two brothers could sign, which we all assumed they couldn't do because I have never in my life have a memory of either of his two younger brothers signing one word to him. And he thought, well, if they're not going to sign, I'm not going to sign. And that's it. Maybe he got wrapped up in the whole debate of to sign, not to sign, to speak, not to speak. Every deaf school had a different philosophy, and no one was the same, and my grandfather made a personal decision. But I don't know. I don't know. When I think about my grandfather, I often get ticked. There was technology I found out as an adult that we could have used that he refused. There were phones that would type everything I would say. I could have called that man from college on his birthday. But no. We could have called him when our event got done 2 hours early, but he was scheduled to pick us up at 6 and we were done at 4, so you better find something to do for 2 hours. But no. And then in the midst of getting angry and frustrated with a man who isn't here to defend himself anymore, and if he was, I'm telling you he would, I think back to this one specific memory, that at the time I didn't understand how special it was. When I came home from college, my sister and my brother, who were younger than I was, joined a community theater group in Hudson Falls. Now, what they did was, in the summer, generally on the hottest week, it always landed on that week, would drive out to the middle of nowhere, Fort Edward, on a road that, if you didn't know it existed, you weren't going to find, and performed in a converted barn that had no ventilation and 2 very old ceiling fans that sat 75 people. And in the middle of August in 90-degree weather, we performed Shakespeare. And the memory that I have is looking out into that 75-seat audience and seeing past the bright light 6 feet, 5 inches of my grandfather sitting dead center, watching 3 of his 10 grandchildren perform Shakespeare in a converted barn in cow country Fort Edward and not hearing a blessed word of it.